Well. It is today's Post-Gazette live show. I'm Paul Zeise. So hopefully you're all off to a really good day. The one thing I will say to you all out there is if you're having trouble commuting, well, join the rest of us. It is a really, really bad day for commuting around the city of Pittsburgh. Weather is bad. Roads are not yet clean. So at the end of the day, it is one of these things where I will tell you, you have maybe about another hour and a half, and then the snow is supposed to stop. So basically, if you want to go somewhere, have a little warm hot chocolate or whatever, wait for a little bit. It shouldn't be too bad when you get out on the roads. I, of course, am Paul Zeise, and we've got lots to get to. Mike Tomlin had his end of the year press conference, which we'll talk about. But I got to be honest with you here, okay? Why does he have it 2 days after the season? They've made no decisions on personnel. They've made no decisions on coaches. Nothing has happened in the last 2 days, day and a half. But Mike Tomlin has his press conference and basically wastes a lot of our time saying nothing, as opposed to waiting like 2 weeks and then having his press conference and saying, okay, well, it's the end of the season. This is what happened. This is what we've done. This is what we've started to get in process for the next season. Instead, it's a whole lot of, well, it's early in the process. We haven't done anything. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Here's the other thing today, and this is where we'll start, okay? The one thing about Antonio Brown, when Antonio Brown was with the Steelers, when Antonio Brown was a player, when Antonio Brown was even playing really well, he had some really high-profile, nonsensical, numbskull moments. But he was Antonio Brown. In other words, for the most part, he was the best player on the field. He was the best player on the Steelers. He was the best player on the field. So whatever you want to say about Antonio Brown, for the most part, when the lights were on and the game happened, right, he was the best player on the field, the best player on the Steelers. Which is why it was okay to deal with some of his silliness. It was okay to deal with some of his off-field nonsense. George Pickens, on the other hand, is not. He could be that guy, but he's not. He could be the best player on the Steelers, but he's not. He could be the best player on the field on a given day, but he's not. He's a guy whose talent is probably at this level and his production is at this level. Okay? Antonio Brown was a guy whose talent was at this level or whatever, and his production was at this level. In other words, he brought it all the time, so you put up with the nonsense that he brought to the table. George Pickens isn't good enough to give this kind of nonsense. He's just not. He has the talent to be. He has the ability to be, okay? But he's far more concerned about all the other silly crap that some of these young players seem to care about than he is about being the best receiver in the NFL. Because if he committed himself to being the best receiver in the NFL, he would have a chance to be that guy. Antonio Brown was that guy for 6 years. He was that guy. The Steelers won games because of Antonio Brown. I can think of 4 or 5 where he made catches down the stretch that nobody else in the league makes. We talk about the immaculate, what do they call it? The immaculate extension or whatever it was, where he run the game, where he put the ball over the goal line against the Ravens. He had a number of games. I can think of one game. I'm trying to think of who they were playing. But he made a catch on the sideline with about 15 seconds or 20 seconds left that was ridiculous. Obviously Ben threw a really good pass, but no other receiver in football is making that catch. He made that catch, they kicked the field goal, won the game. My point is, George Pickens is not that guy. He's not good enough to act like a jackass. He's not. He's not good enough to give grief. He's not good enough to be a headache to the coaches. And that's what he is. At some point, you hope that he becomes good enough that he can overcome some of the nonsense that he does. Now, what am I talking about? Let me just go to this story here that's written in the New York Post, actually, quoting The Athletic, actually. It says, The Athletic reported Tuesday that George Pickens was late to the Steelers' Christmas Day game against the Chiefs, not arriving to Acrisure Stadium until after Coach Mike Tomlin had submitted his inactive list. Tomlin reportedly told players to be at the home stadium at least 2 hours before kickoff, and Pickens did not arrive until an hour and 25 minutes prior to game time. Steelers coach was asked about his report Tuesday, and of course he said, I just can't answer it definitively because I don't know. Come on, man. Pickens received a usual snap count and target share. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to, this situation with George Pickens, no offense at all, but George Pickens needs to grow the hell up. Needs to grow up. More importantly, he's not good enough to act the way he acts. He's just not. And so, and that's not to say that he couldn't be, because I think he could be. He's got a lot of athletic ability. He's got a lot of natural talent. He's got a lot of the stuff that makes, you think, boy, this guy can be an elite receiver. But guess what? Unless you work on your game in that regard, unless you get better at working on your game in that regard, unless you continue to work on your game and get better. And, Antonio Brown, for whatever you want to say about Antonio Brown, he was the first guy in the building, the last guy to leave. He was on the jugs machine. He was, in the weight room. He was in the workout room. He was a guy that worked harder than anybody else in the building. And I've often said this, if Ben Roethlisberger had Antonio Brown's work ethic, Ben Roethlisberger would be Tom Brady. But he just never did. And that's not to say that Ben Roethlisberger was lazy, but he was never the guy. He was never that guy. Antonio Brown was. And so I feel like it is one of those things where now somebody needs to sit down with George Pickens. And you would hope it would be somebody like Cam Hayward, who would sit down with George Pickens and say, George, here's the thing. You've got a world of talent. You could be a really, really good player. You've got more talent than most of the guys that play receiver in the NFL. In fact, you have more talent than most of the guys that play in the NFL. But you're wasting it. And you're wasting it because at the end of the day, you don't care about being that guy who is the best player. Period. That's what I think it comes down to. It's going to take somebody, and it can't be the coach, it can't be the head coach, it can't be the receivers coach, can't be anybody. All I'm saying to you is I think that it comes down to really, really, really making sure that somebody has this conversation with George Pickens. You can't trade him, I don't think, because, again, for whatever you think about George Pickens, you have 1 year left with him, but he's going to make about $1.5 million. You're not getting a receiver to do what George Pickens does for $1.5 million. But I would say this. If the Steelers are really serious, what they should do is say to George Pickens, listen, this is a prove-it year for you. See, I'm on the Steelers. I care less about having George Pickens long-term because at this point now, to me, I think if you look at the Steelers, they're in year-to-year mode, which would tell me you've got one more year with George Pickens. He's making $1.6 million, I think, next year, something like that. Tell him, if you want to get paid, you better bring it this year. You better bring it. If you're going to bring it, you'll get paid. If you don't, you're going to get paid, a lot less than you should be. You know what speaks to a lot of these guys? Honestly, money. Period. Money. That's what speaks to these guys. And when you put it in those terms, maybe George Pickens will become a lot less of a jerk. Period. And I think that's the thing about it. Because if he wants to, he can be one of the best players in the league. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to get to than George Pickens. But that was the story of the day, that George Pickens was late for the game against the Chiefs on Christmas Day. That he apparently was, whatever he was doing, he showed up late. Basically, he showed up, at a time when it was kind of like way after he needed to be there. And the next thing you know, they're wondering about why. So there's that. There's another story out there that Davante Adams wants to play for the Steelers. Actually, more specifically to Mike Tomlin. You ever notice all these guys want to play for Mike Tomlin? But the guys that actually play for Mike Tomlin don't seem to get it done. I mean, today, yesterday was clean out your locker day and all that other stuff. And, Pat Fryermuth talked and, 5 or 6 guys talked and they all said the same thing. Oh, we believe in Mike Tomlin. He's the guy. He's the man. We know he's the man, yada, yada, yada. Okay, good. Here's my question. Why is the discussion about Mike Tomlin always all of these players want to play? They'll lay down their lives for him. They'll play as hard as they can play for him. But when it comes to the playoffs and it comes to actually when it counts, none of them actually seem to perform well. Like the best tribute you can have to Mike Tomlin is when the playoffs begin, you play really at a high level. But it's funny, all these players seem to have this fantasy about what it's like to play for Mike Tomlin. And I say the same thing all the time. His own players say they want to play for him. But I've seen no evidence in the playoffs that these guys are actually going out of their way, to play, scratch for that last inch on the field and all the other cliches there are. In fact, I can make an argument it looked like the Steelers quit in the first half against the Ravens the other day. So I feel like, this whole thing about Davante Adams now but again, why do the Steelers want another old guy? I'm not interested in Davante Adams. I'm not interested in Aaron Rodgers. I'm not interested in all these guys that, these old guys who all are at the end of their careers and they're saying, oh, yeah, we'd love to play for Mike Tomlin for one last year. How about do what these organizations are doing that are winning? How about go and rebuild? I compare the Steelers to the Penguins. The Penguins have literally wasted now 3-4 seasons trying to piece together mediocre teams just to say, well, we've made the playoffs. They have a coach that they don't want to move on from because, he had some success early on. And the bottom line is all they're doing is extending their misery. If the Steelers spend one more year trying to piecemeal together a roster, and they go out and get an Aaron Rodgers and somebody else like that, and Davante Adams and some old running back, and they're able to slop together another 10-win season where they get to the wild card game and then they lose. Do you know what they really essentially will have done? Wasted another year, and in essence, probably another 2 or 3 years down the road. Because the longer you kick the can down the road, the longer it's going to take for you to get to where you need to get to. Period. And so to me, the Steelers and the Penguins are in the same place. You see where the Penguins are. You know, they refuse to move on from Letang and Malkin, and you know, they obviously should keep Crosby around because he'll sell tickets. But Tristan Jarry was a guy that, you know, they decided they were going to sign, and they've got like 4 or 5 or 6 guys that they continue to try and build around, even though they're old and they're done. And guess what? If you look at the standings, they're right there, you know, the playoff spots 7, 8, 9, you know, and then there's 9 and 10, 12, 9, 10, 11, 12. So say 7 to 12, which is all the mediocre middle teams. The Penguins are right there in that group. If they have a couple of good weeks, they could actually get right into the point where they're the, you know, team 8 or team 7. And then they could say, see, you see, we're a playoff team. You don't know what you're talking about. We got there. And once you get in, all it takes is a hot goalie and you can win it all. That's what the Steelers are doing. But what the Steelers are really doing is they are basically retarding their progress as an organization. Now, if you want to tell me next year they come back with a brand new offensive coordinator philosophy, they have Justin Fields as their quarterback. They're running an offense around Justin Fields' talents. They signed a couple of dynamic receivers and drafted a couple of guys to help their offense. I might listen to that because Justin Fields is young. Their offensive line at that point would be young. Their receiving core would still at that point be young. Then you're talking about, okay, maybe we'll go from here to there. But if the offseason is going to be another offseason where all the Steelers are going to do is try and figure out how they can put together a 9-8, 10-7 team that sneaks into the playoffs, if that's the offseason, then they're wasting all of our time. Wasting it. Just like the Penguins have now wasted 3 seasons trying to, recapture magic or something like that isn't there and isn't coming back. It's the same thing with the Steelers. This group of Steelers you have compiled with T.J. Watt, with Cam Hayward, with Minka Fitzpatrick, with Alex Highsmith, this group together you got together, it ain't good enough. Period. It ain't. The offense that you want to put together, you want to run the football and all this other good stuff, great. Ain't good enough. So quite frankly, the last few years I've given them the benefit of the doubt. But this offseason, if there aren't some dramatic changes that are made, philosophy-wise, player-wise, everything else, then guess what? We're wasting another season. I don't want to hear about, hey, we're 9-7 or 9-8 and 10-7 again. Yay, we got to the playoffs. We're going to play in the playoffs. I don't want to hear about it. You want to tell me you're going to do some things differently? You're going to, invest in the offense? You're going to try and become more dynamic? I'll listen to that. And the only reason I bring that up is because today was the Dog and Pony Show. The annual Dog and Pony Show is what I call it. And that is the Dog and Pony Show that Mike Tomlin puts on at the end of the season. It's the most useless press conference of the year. He hasn't met with his coaches. He hasn't met with Omar Khan. He did meet with Dan Rooney with Art Rooney. He did meet with Art Rooney, but who cares? Art Rooney doesn't care. Art Rooney doesn't care about winning championships. Art Rooney doesn't care about trying to get over the top. Art Rooney doesn't care about those things. Dan Rooney did. If Dan Rooney was still alive and, young and whatever and running the team, I actually think there'd be some things that are going on differently, including perhaps the Steelers moving on from Mike Tomlin. Because Dan Rooney was a football guy that cared about winning. But Art Rooney is not. He's a nice guy. He's a really good dude. Classy guy. But he's not a football guy. And winning a Super Bowl it's not a priority for him. The Steelers make money. The Steelers brand is still what it is. The Steelers, for the most part are successful from the standpoint of they win more games than they lose. And that's really all he cares about. It's just so frustrating. And if you listen to Mike Tomlin today, I don't know how anybody out there could actually really believe, okay, that there's going to be changes coming down the pike. There aren't. It's going to be the same old, regardless if you want to. And I think that's really what it comes down to when it comes to them. You as a Steeler fan have to figure out, are you just sort of happy being what they are? Or do you want them to take a shot at going to the next level? Now, and here's the thing I'll tell you about it, okay? You've lost 8 seasons in a row. You've not won a playoff game. 8 seasons in a row. Think about that. And if you watched Mike Tomlin's press conference today, you know what I saw? A coach who really has no issue, no pressure, nothing. Nothing. No pressure at all. Talking about next year, talking about, we're going to make some changes. Talking about, the competitive fire in me, I enjoy it. No pressure at all. No pressure at all. No feeling of, boy, I need to have a sense of urgency. No feeling of, boy, I know my seat is really hot. He sounded to me like a guy who understands his job is never going to be in jeopardy. And as long as he goes 8, 9, 10 wins every year, his job is never going to be in jeopardy. Period. Look at the number of guys out there who won a Super Bowl and got fired. But you look at Doug Peterson, he won a Super Bowl. He's been fired twice. He's won a Super Bowl way more recently than Mike Tomlin. He's been fired twice. Mike McCarthy beat Mike Tomlin in the last Super Bowl that Mike Tomlin played. He's been fired twice. But with the Steelers, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. Period. And I think that's what it comes down to. Doesn't matter. And I think that's really what is so frustrating. Mike Tomlin does not have any pressure at all to make a change. But I think that's it. Period. Like, if you have no pressure to make a change, if you have no pressure to get better, if you have no pressure at all on you for your job, what is the motivation for you to get better? Mike Tomlin can sit here and say, oh, well, I'm competitive. I want to win. I want to do this, that, and everything. Have we seen that the last 8 years? Have we seen anything that suggests that this guy is scratching and clawing and fighting his ass off to try and win? Have we seen any of that yet in the last 8 years? Because he doesn't need to. Doesn't need to at all. You watch some of these other coaches, they know if they don't win, they lose their job. Period. Not here. Mike Tomlin can have a press conference. Oh, yeah, kumbaya. Well, we might go with Russell Wilson next year. We might go with Justin Fields. Hell, who knows? We might go with Cal Allen. Who cares? As I've said a number of years about the Penguins, the Steelers have become the ultimate. Bring them all back. Bring them back. Bring back the group, the crew. Let's bring them all back. It's working so well. You can get away with that if there's no pressure from the owner on you to win. And there's no pressure on the owner to win, period. And I think that's part of the problem. Mike Tomlin knows he ain't going anywhere no matter even, you know what? I look at the comments here that we have. I look at the comments we have on our, stories on the Post-Gazette website. I look at what goes on social media. Doesn't matter to Mike Tomlin. Doesn't matter to the Steelers. You want to know why? Because the Steelers and Art Rooney is way too happy. Way too happy to have a team that just, kind of squeaks into the playoffs every year. Because, hey, if they're in the playoffs every year, they have a chance to win it all, don't they? That's what they tell themselves. That's what Art Rooney will tell you. Listen, I guess it'll be next week, I think, when Art Rooney meets with the media guys. It'll be the same thing. Art Rooney will say, I can't look at a season that we made the playoffs as not being a success, which is silly. So, again, when I watched the press conference today, it's all the same word soup. What do we call it? Word salad for Mike Tomlin. A bunch of big words strung together that mean nothing. It's frustrating to watch, to be honest. No passion, no fire, no, emotion, nothing. Just the same old cliches and nonsense. But again, that's all he needs to do. He knows this. Because at the end of the day, there's not going to be a change made, and he knows this. He talked about quarterback mobility and how important it is, and there are some people that say, well, that's hinting that he's, leaning towards Justin Fields. No, it's not. He's been saying the same thing for 5 years. Ultimately, it could be Justin Fields who is the starting quarterback. But really, they're going to come back with Justin Fields. They're going to come back with Russell Wilson. They'll probably let Najee Harris walk. They'll come back with a similar running back there. They'll come back with Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens. They'll probably let Van Jefferson or, some of those guys, but it'll be George Pickens, Calvin Austin, and, a couple of other guys. Ham and Eggers probably. Where are the changes coming? If they want to impress me, they will move on from Arthur Smith, go get a young, innovative, aggressive, offensive coordinator that knows what to do with a running quarterback like Justin Fields. That'd be a good first step. Second step is they'll trade a couple of the guys they have on defense, like I said yesterday. Get rid of some of those contracts and go get some cornerbacks and receivers. That'd be a good second step. If they want to fire Terrell Austin, which would be stupid. Terrell Austin's a really good football coach. He knows what he's doing, but he's running Mike Tomlin's defense. So if you're going to fire him, you're essentially firing Mike Tomlin without firing Mike Tomlin. I get a kick out of people that are all upset and they want to say all these things about Terrell Austin, and I keep trying to say to you, he's running Mike Tomlin's defense. The other guy is, what's his name, the offensive line coach, Meyer. Really? Who cares? Do you really think if you bring back Mike Munchak, it's going to make a difference? I'll tell you, it's not. You want to tell me you move on from Arthur Smith? Bring in a new offensive coordinator who brings in his own guys? I'll listen to that. That might be interesting. But the rest of it is silly. Period. So at the end of the day, it's one of these things where I just have to laugh at, I just have to laugh. Because at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I just have to say Mike Tomlin has the ultimate job security, period. And as a result, he doesn't have to worry about things. Game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's is apparently the home of 80-cent wings Monday through Thursday. Home of the Paul's Ice Grilled Cheese Sandwich. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. And, of course, Archie's a great sponsor of ours, so when you get there, tell him that Archie said hello. Tell him I said hello. Here's the other thing is I'm going to be down at Archie's doing my show right now. Actually, in the next few days, Archie's been a little under the weather, but as soon as he's back, I'm going to get down there. I'm going to start moving my show, put it on the road. We're going to go a bunch of different places and have a good time. We will continue to talk about the Steelers, obviously, but again, if there's no accountability at all, which there aren't here, and there's no pressure on Mike Tomlin, then guess what? There's no reason for him to feel the heat.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.